Welcome, listeners, to www.IronRadio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowry.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening. Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry. I'm an exercise physiologist, I'm a sports nutritionist, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder. I'm running solo in the beginning of this special episode today. We're just going to share some listener mail and some news, like usual. And then we're going to do an Arnold Fitness Weekend pre-event kind of episode. Phil actually took his phone to record some comments and anticipations and things like that on the road trip to Columbus, Ohio for what's arguably the biggest fitness event of the calendar. And again, just to kind of check in with his thoughts and the people that he's traveling with. But I digress. Let's do just a little bit of mail and news.
Strength and muscle sport news.
This first bit of mail I got from Dr. Nelson, I'll probably end up checking in with him and get his comments on it in a week or two as well. Basically, it is this. This comes from, Dr. Nelson and Andrew. So, Andrew says, "Hi, gentlemen. First, Iron Radio is amazing. As a veteran of the fitness industry and a long-time and frequent harasser of Mike Nelson for quotes and expertise, I can't believe it's taken me this long to discover what you guys have been doing for 10-plus years. Better late than never, I suppose, and now I have another 400 episodes to catch up on, so thank you for what you're doing. Question. I've never heard you guys discuss, are we limited in the amount of energy that we can burn in a day? A 2016 study entitled Constrained Energy Theory puts forward a hypothesis that we are. They measured movement and energy expenditure across a wide range of populations, including a hunter-gatherer tribe, and found that per pound of body weight, everyone burns about the same number of calories daily, regardless of whether they are tracking game over miles of rough terrain or sitting at a desk or doing something in between. The study shows an uptick in calorie burn when you go from sedentary to active, but no additional calorie burn when you go from active to super active. So he's describing this non-linear relationship, right? It's not endlessly more and more and more expenditure gain, like net, negative expenditure by just doing more and more beyond a certain point. Long, arduous workouts don't burn additional fat, according to this theory, but they cut into calories budgeted for other functions like reproduction, cognition, digestion, and tissue repair. And I have some thoughts on that, but bear with me. This is head spinning, but it also seemed to make sense. People seem to burn a few pounds off at the beginning of a new workout program, then they find a new slightly lower quote-unquote normal, which they maintain, unless they change their diet, regardless if they bump up their exercise even further thereafter. Though this may seem discouraging to some people, I see a few advantages to this. One, it's more evidence for the old adage that you can't out-train a bad diet, something that Andrew says people need to hear. More importantly, it also could help deter people with body image issues, for example, who might otherwise be inclined to exercise obsessively and excessively. So what are your thoughts on this study and its implications? Thanks so much, Andrew. Okay, Andrew, here's my take on this at least, and we'll catch up. We'll harass Dr. Nelson some more in the near future. One, this study isn't a true experimental design when you dig into it, and I'm sure you understand that. So it's not causal. Now, they did use good methodology. I'm not going to bore people with how they measure energy expenditure, but what they did was legitimate. But again, it's not like they took two groups and had them one exercise more and more and more, and then see did their, let's say, basal metabolic rate start to drop to compensate, right, an equal amount. That I would want to see something like that, a direct comparison with one group who trains their butt off and another who doesn't, and see if you still get that plateau, right? That non-linear kind of effect where eventually, you're just not getting much bang for the buck out of more and more physical activity. If this is true, to me, it reinforces something that I was just talking to students about, which is exercise is not simply anti-eating. So much of and again, no offense to Andrew, because I think he is one, but no offense to the science journalists out there, but some of them are bad. And they have the public believing that exercise is anti-eating, right? How long do I have to jog to burn off this bagel? That kind of thing. To me, it's missing the point, and this paper helps make my point, I think, that it's the adaptations that exercise imbues. It's not just the calorie drain. In other words, you build more capillaries in mitochondria, so you become a better fat burner. That's going to change your body composition over time. So the effects of training, sure, some of it's the calorie expenditure, but only up to a point. And again, that's what this study is sort of supporting. It's really the adaptations that we're after, not just the during, mid-exercise calorie expenditure, and not even necessarily the non-exercise physical activity, right? The NEPA, or what's sometimes called NEAT, the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's not just about that. It's about changing from the subcellular level all the way up. So more mitochondria, more Krebs cycles and electron transport activity within those mitochondria, right? More fat burning, more beta oxidation in those mitochondrial furnaces. Things like that. More capillaries to bring in the oxygen and, yes, the fat that you mobilize from your love handles. A more voluminous left ventricle so you can move blood more efficiently. And get that oxygen and those fuels down to the furnaces in your mitochondria to be burned. You get the point. There are many adaptations, hormonal adaptations, things like that. And I think that's the real reason we need to push exercise, not looking at it like it's just a calorie drain. Because, again, this study sort of supports that. It's only going to drain calories in a net benefit kind of way up to a point. Now, as far as the claim in this theory, or at least the hypothesis, that you would cut into calories budgeted for other functions, reproduction, cognition, digestion, tissue repair. Tissue repair, I can see that. I mean, when you look at people who are very overtrained, for example, and they are hyper expenditure kinds of people, they're not very muscularly large, nagging injuries hang around. That could be true. Some of these other things, I'm not quite as sure. When it comes to cognition, I'd have to look and see if there are any papers that, people with large calorie expenditures somehow have, lower cognition, lower IQ, if you will, or less, memory, focus, concentration. There's a lot of simple computer-type tests like the Stroop words test. And I wonder how people that are training their butts off, if they're actually lower in that. I would think they're not. Usually the body prioritizes the brain. I mean, to me, the hormone cortisol is almost evidence of that, right? Its job is to degrade, for example, muscle protein, and so you can eventually get blood glucose, convert it to blood glucose for your brain, for a fuel, right? It's prioritizing your brain over your muscles. So your body tends to do that in large part. You'll see huge changes, for example, in blood flow during intense exercise, but the brain doesn't get robbed the way that some other organs do. So I don't think that you're going to budget calories away from your brain and cognition to somehow try to fix the hyper expenditure, right? In other words, to save all the energy expenditure for the exercise because you've got some ceiling, right? That's kind of what this study is saying. There's a ceiling on how much energy a person can burn every day, how many calories you can burn. I'm also not sure about digestion. Digestion, some of those absorptive processes are ATP dependent. They're energy dependent. And I think we would see serious, maldigestion problems in people who exercise really hard. Now, there are GI issues in some people who overtrain or train really, really hard. But again, we would need a direct experimental design where you have a control group who's exercising none or some and compare that to hyper exercise, expenditure people, and be able to actually document poor absorption of nutrients. do they have steatorrhea, which is sort of oily discharge diarrhea because of fat maldigestion, things like that. And can you link that to the fact that their guts being robbed of energy, your body is deprioritizing digestion like that. I'm not sure you're going to see a ton of that. And then also reproduction, possibly. You do see a fall in testosterone, for example, in people who overtrain. But again, now we're talking about sort of literal overtraining and not just high energy expenditure. So, as you point out, Andrew, it's sort of head spinning that this might be true. We need experimental models to take a closer look. That's my opinion. I will say this, though. Muscle soreness from a lot of exercise, at least from our listeners, that would be one way to raise energy expenditure that was not movement. This study was based largely on movement. And one of the ways that you can get increased muscular energy expenditure without actually moving, because that's one of the things they touch on in this study, would be soreness. I've actually looked at this myself in the lab, and I have other references that when you're sore, you're hypermetabolic to the tune of about 15%. In other words, your calorie burn is about 15% higher because of this quote-unquote injury to your muscles. So, all right, that's about a 10-minute ramble about that. We'll see what Dr. Nelson has to say about this. But let me go on to one other paper before we catch up with Phil and his crew on the road. This is from Wilk and colleagues, brand new Polish study from the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine. The effects of eccentric cadence on power and velocity of the bar during the concentric phase of the bench press movement. So this is not nutritional at all. This is very much just sort of a kinesiology type look. It says general studies have demonstrated that faster movement tempo in resistance training leads to an increase in muscle power, right? Speed strength, if you will. It's a good way to think about power in watts. Whereas lower movement speed is beneficial in the development of muscle strength and hypertrophy. So again, time under tension sort of idea. So this might be a nice comparison, I thought, between the powerlifting crowd, which is about explosiveness and speed strength, if you will, and the bodybuilders who don't care as much about that, and they want hypertrophy, right, and slower reps, maybe. So what they did was they looked at the eccentric phase, the lowering, and how long it took in seconds, the pause at the bottom, the concentric phase duration, and then the pause at the top. So eccentric, pause, then concentric, and pause. And again, in seconds. So what did they find? The velocity, this is one example, I'm not going to read the whole paper, but the velocity evaluated for the regular type of eccentric tempo, which they considered 2 seconds down and everything else pretty much instantaneous. Regular eccentric did express an average bar velocity of 0.6 plus or minus 0.09 meters per second. So 0.6 meters per second of bar speed, if you will. And that was significantly higher if they did a longer eccentric contraction beforehand. So it says compared to the eccentric slow condition, which was 6 seconds down and everything else more or less instantaneous, their bar speed was 0.52 plus or minus 0.08 meters per second. So instead of 0.60 meters per second, they went to 0.52 meters per second. So that looks like about a 13% drop in subsequent bar speed, right, when you slow down the negative beforehand. They end by saying the main finding of this study indicates that the duration of the eccentric phase of the movement has a significant impact on the muscular power and velocity during the concentric phase of the movement. So I don't know if that's that surprising to anybody. To me, it looks like, well, if you're going to expend more effort, fighting the contraction, the bar all the way down with this slow negative beforehand, that's going to slow down the subsequent upward rep in the bench, right? So, but interesting idea, and maybe some of you powerlifters could use that. If you want to maximize power and velocity, you're not going to want to do a real slow grinding negative before you try to explode back upward, or maybe in certain types of speed training, you hold the bar isometrically. Now this wasn't isometric, but hold it just briefly before you explode back up. Because if you hold it, in this case, they're using, 6 seconds downward. That's enough. It's going to slow you down on the way up. So you don't want to do speed work blunted like that, I suppose. So just some thoughts from a study by Wilk and colleagues. Brand new stuff, and how we might use and abuse the eccentric portion of a movement, for growth versus power mesocycles. All right, that's enough rambling out of me. We're going to go to break early, and when we come back, we're going to have on-the-road input from Phil and his crew, just sort of handing around a recorder, right, the phone, and giving their thoughts on what they hope to see or anything else really that comes to mind, I think, on their journey to the Arnold Fitness Weekend. Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle, oh, you poor meathead, all that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that. And I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book. But that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. Iron Radio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
Hey everybody, this is Phil Stevens. I am co-host of Iron Radio. I'm a powerlifter. I'm going to do some Highland Games again. I've done a bunch of other sports. I'm owner and head coach of Strength Guild and amongst other things. And with me we have
Dow Gaines, a powerlifter and pretty much nobody.
I'm Brian Hartzell and I'm in the back seat. I'm a powerlifter.
We also have Felicia, but she's just chilling, hanging out. We've got on the road right now, I'd say we're one of the strongest vehicles in the country. So we also have one of the strongest vehicles in the country just to hold our big asses. I don't know, a combined total of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 50. I don't know, 1,200 pounds or so of human, split between 4 people. Anyways, we're heading to the Arnold, and I don't know, we were just having some conversations, and we're going to shoot the shit with you guys for a bit, and then give some Arnold predictions and things like that. But to start off, one of the things that we got to talking about, we were talking about Brian's training. So he just got done with that meet. Everybody talked to him a couple weeks ago, where he squatted 903, deadlifted 903, and had a horrible bench in the mid-4s. Right, Brian?
Terrible.
And just talking about what's next and just training in general. And one of the things we got talking about was the base he has. So basically, Brian is big enough and strong enough that, like, he can squat 850 and not think about it and mess up. And we were talking about you can't squat 1,000 and mess up. So basically, we were talking about the base that's built versus, and now it's time to pick away the minutia. To basically to get to 1,000, get to 2,500 pound total. It's not so much about the base now as it is getting everything spot on. So we're gonna shoot the shit about that a little bit, and just the things we were talking about. Like, one thing, what initially got us talking about was his bench, right? So, and his shoulder issues. He has some shoulder pain, and Dow got to talking about one of the problems is probably just a shoulder girdle and the way he holds himself, and not basically Brian will lay down on the bench and just bench a lot of times until it gets to heavier attempts. So in training, a lot of times in training we're using sub-maximal weights, and he's not using the form that like me or Dow would have to use in a training weight, because we're not 6'3", 400 pounds. Brian gets away with things the average genetically not gifted human gets away with. So you want to touch on that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, we started out, like Phil said, just talking about his shoulder pain, which led to he was using a slingshot and having shoulder issues because he had to keep his elbows in tight, which, as most people know, is how you're supposed to bench. And it's not a knock on Brian. It's just he's been able to get away with how he's moved for so long, and he's benched like a bodybuilder for so many years that the front of his rotator cuff has basically been anterior rotated to where when he presses it causes an impingement, unless when he rotates his elbows in enough, because he can't, the rear of his shoulders aren't strong enough to compensate for the front end and bring his shoulders back into alignment and really engage his lats to allow his shoulder to move in the right position. So when he's pressing, it causes an impingement in his shoulder girdle. And that got us to talking about how with his training he can lay down and bench 315 to 365 for sets of 10 with no pain that way, so it doesn't ever register to him that he needs to change it up. But when it comes into a meet and he's having to squat on top of deadlift, on top of bench, and those muscles are getting more and more fatigued, on top of inflammatory problems in his shoulder, it leads to the pain in his shoulder to where his bench can't be as much. And a lot of it stems from his lack of lat engagement. And it's not, like I said, it's not a knock on Brian. We've had a few talks about it in the past, and he's actually getting a lot better about it. But it's just one of those things, unless you're taught and somebody else is watching you, you'll never know that you're having that issue. And it comes down to, that's why at some level you have to get a coach who's going to help you with that minutia, the smaller parts. But you can't get there if that's all you worry about.
Yeah. And then we got into talking about it's problematic. We get a lot of younger lifters that are starting out, and they're spending 87% of their time worrying about the minutia, and 13% of the time or less worried about just building a big ass base. Which Brian doesn't have to worry about anymore. He spent, I don't know how long you've been lifting.
10 years.
So 9 years. Just lifting and moving heavy shit. So, and not so worried about the perfect form. His form wasn't shit. Obviously, it's not shit because he was squatting 8. What'd you squat at your first meet?
765.
Yeah. So 765 at his first meet in mowing shoes, and no belt, and no sleeves. So from there, it's okay. Now we need to work on the minutia. Whereas the other people get so wrapped up in minutia. And I think we started talking about this too is with diets. People start talking about, they sweat the exact macro when their basic diet is crap. So, or they're not eating enough in the first place to support their goals. So, we got talking about that, and basically, yeah, you need to. Brian is at a point where minutia means a lot, and that's what we were talking about. Is like For him to make great progress now, let's say go from 903 to 950, we need to fix little things. To go from 405 to 800, you need to sweat the big things. So, I mean, that needs to be where most of your concentration's on. Not saying that you don't work on form, you don't work on the little things early, but most of your concentration goes on. If you're a 250-pound man, you're squatting 405, the majority of your concentration needs to be on just getting stronger, and time under the bar. Nobody cares if you have a perfect squat and it's 405. That was technically perfect. Yeah, technically perfect crap. So, and that's kind of where we built on. And then, we talked about his squat too, which you worked on a lot, in between the last 3 meets. Meet 1, it was just come in and squat and show everybody, look, I can squat 763 on just basically doing it. To then the next meet, 8 something. To the next meet, 90. What was it? Your third meet, 903? Yeah. So third meet ever, hit 903. There was a lot of progress in there in form, and that's where his biggest gains are going from. I mean, I don't know. You think you can get much bigger than you are?
I think if I actually try and work on my diet and get my water down and really eat enough, I think I could get a lot bigger and stronger. Yeah. And I think something I really need to work on is getting under that squat bar at 60, 70, 80% and really thinking about how I would squat with 900 pounds on my back. Because sometimes I'll grab 700, 600 pound squats and just kind of do them. And I'll do like a 3/4 rep. I'll only come up about 3/4 of the way. And I like to pound those kind of like a piston squat out for a set of 5. Because, that's kind of what a bodybuilder would do. You want to hit that time under tension and build your muscles up. But I need to really think about how I would do those lighter weight squats that would benefit me more for when I get under a heavyweight squat. But besides that, I think my deadlifts are pretty similar to training and competition, and my bench is. I probably need to work on my bench too and make my bench more like it would be for competition when I'm just doing lighter weight.
Yeah, I think Brian hit on a good point. We've had a lot of conversations because me and him lift in the same gym, and I would point it out to him, and he's made a conscious effort since then about even when you're doing reps, it should be, say you're doing a set of 10, it should be a set of 10 singles under basically one unrack. They should be moving it with a purpose, and a lot of people also get into the point of, I'm going to do this set of 10 as easy as possible with the least amount of effort to do 10, where each rep should be, max effort like you'd be moving your max weight. And then it gets set ingrained that whenever you get under a squat bar or under a bench or you grab a deadlift, that all you know is one speed, no matter what it is. And this also brought up a point in my head that we talked about earlier about weak point training. Basically, Brian's just now figuring out where his weak points are. He's built such a big base with how strong he is, which is unheard of to be as strong as he is, and just now figuring out his weaknesses, which shows how big of a ceiling that he possibly has. And that's where a lot of people get into, and we had this conversation earlier about constantly going up to their maxes and not getting any stronger because they're not attacking the weak parts of their lift that's holding them back from making that max higher. And all they know is, I'm going to go max out, and it leads to injury because you've not fixed the issues that you've had at the 70 to 80% range. All you know is to push through the pain that you're having to try and hit another max that's never going to come.
No, yeah, and both those points I'll hit on. We'll just hit on the weak point areas. I mean, that's another one about picking minutia over the big things. I think it was Windler was like, talking to some guy, and he's like, you don't have a weak point, you're just weak. At a certain point you don't. You're just, your entire body can be the weak point. You know, if you're squatting, 315 and you're, again, a large male, you're just weak. You don't need to worry about your rear delt and your this and that. The majority of the time, you just need to get stronger. But then you start getting up to max weights, and yeah, now we need to pick away at the minutia again. This minutia being the weak point. What's causing the failure or the miss movement in the lift? With Brian, that's at 850, 900. And then the other thing is, like they were just talking about, is treating lifting more like it's competition. Maybe not in how psyched up you get, and I don't think I can get as psyched up as I can in a meet. I get myself up for heavy lifts, 90% and stuff like that, but one thing that I preach to my lifters, like one of my Olympic lifters recently was having issues. She had stage fright, I guess is what you'd call it. She'd get on the big stage and, okay, now it's time to put up these numbers. Well, I explained to her, like in my head, through my whole training cycle, let's say I'm doing a 3-month training cycle, 12 weeks or whatever, leading up to a meet. Even when I'm 12 weeks out and I'm working with lightweight, 70%, in my head, I'm hitting my goal weight during those 70%. I'm not squatting, 500. I'm squatting 800. Every one of those reps is like, this is 800, this is 800, this is how it's going to feel, this is how I'm going to do it. Every week, up to when I'm hitting 700 singles. That wasn't 700, that was 800. This is how I'm going to treat it. I treat every single rep exactly the same. And like Dal was saying, you're not doing a set of 10, you're doing 10 singles. And every one of those needs to be perfect. If rep 3's messed up, okay, I fix it on rep 4. You don't go right to rep 4 without thinking about it. Okay, what went wrong? Okay, fix it. Okay, if I can't fix it on number 4, shit, what's going wrong? Fix it on number 5. Every single rep, you take at least a second there to register how to feel. Did anything go wrong? Nope, it was good. Okay, repeat that. And until you can hit a set of 10 that are just spot on. And spot on doesn't mean rep 10 may be friggin' hard because it's rep 10, but it needs to be spot on as far as form.
Yeah, and with that, people talk about the only time you can really see weaknesses is under a max load, pushing a max weight. But if you treat your squats like that, anybody with a decently trained eye, if you're moving maximally against a sub-maximal weight, will be able to pick out that you're moving incorrectly and be able to see your weaknesses under a lighter load to where you never get into that point of risking injury because you're moving improperly under a load that can hurt you.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. Yeah, because let's say we give a kid 70% and he squats it. We got 315 on the bar, and the first rep he comes up and gives 320 pounds of pressure, just enough to move it. And then the next rep, we tell him to go as fast as he can. He shoots his hips up. You see that all the time. The hips shoot up out of the hole, and then he kind of good mornings it up. Sure, he still makes the lift safely, but it was inefficient, it wasn't right, and he just showed his weakness. Hamstrings aren't pulling right, probably a little back weakness too. So, and that's another thing. Plus, you can't understate the training benefit of it. Like, I would rather see somebody, we're doing 70%. I would rather see a set of 5 killed than a set of 10 just gone through. You're going to get much more training benefit out of it. You're treating it just like the competition lift. And I've said this to people a ton of times. When I'm deadlifting 750 or whatever it is, they see me pull 500 super fast. They see me pull 750. Of course it's slow. It's 95%. I'm not trying to go slow with it. I'm trying to crush it just as fast as I did the 500. So, you train yourself to do every lift that way. The only time that we change it up, we'll see if these guys agree, is now assistance work. It's a different thing. It's not a competition lift. So usually what we have people do is, okay, now it's time to do like Brian was talking about on the show, mind on the muscle, this and that. We're looking to attack that weakness. So
yeah, and I think a lot of people go entirely too heavy with assistance work. Your body can only handle so much load through a workout, and especially as weeks tack on, that when you go too heavy, you have to start compensating with some point. And you'll be able to hide a lot of weaknesses with your assistance work if you're doing them improperly with too heavy of a load. That'll eventually show itself and lead to injury in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then the good part with keeping it a little bit lighter is you can actually, once you get in tuned enough with your body, like what Brian talked about, you'll be able to start feeling those weaknesses, because those are the points that are starting to get fatigued first. And once you get that down, it's fatiguing first, and you can kind of change around your assistance workouts to focus more on those areas to bring them up. And then when you go into another assistance workout that involves more muscle groups, those aren't getting fatigued first. So the bigger areas are getting able to come along, and it just starts to compound on top of itself. And that's basically how you build that base to make your ceiling higher, is picking out the one thing that is the weakest, working on that first, and then slowly stair-stepping and domino effect the entire body. And then, like, where people can get away with weaknesses is improper movement, and that's where we get to, you need to have somebody with an eye on you, because like you see with a squat is an easy one to put an example to. Somebody can move a weight great and it moves fine, you don't see any, like, their knees cave in or their hips shoot up, but they have their back in a super arch because their core's not strong enough. And everybody just looks at their squat and their death and be like, oh, that weight moved great. But what's going to happen is they have a scissor squat or open scissor squat that's going to lead to back problems. And then when they get to a max load, they're going to get folded in half and going to lead to either back issues or hip issues.
And then we're talking about longevity. Yeah, they can get away with it. They've built up enough compensation in their wrong movement to do it. But over time, 5 years from now, where are they going to be at? We'll give I forgot when the phone rang. So the phone rang a little bit ago. Sorry about that, guys. But that was another strong person calling. That was JP Price giving us a call. So I'll call you back, JP, here in a minute. Let's get Brian's take on some assistance work.
Well, something I really need to work on personally is just getting my diet better, so I have enough calories in the day to actually make it through my assistance work like I want to. Sometimes, unfortunately, I'd hit the heavier set for the squats, and Phil had written like a 5x5, and I'd do 3, and I said, that's all I got today, so that's all I do. And most of the time it was because I had a shit day at work and I didn't eat what I wanted to. So, just making sure you got enough food in your tank to get through all your assistance work is kind of a big deal when you're a big guy.
Now I'm gonna make Brian wear a GoPro every time he goes to the gym, and he's got to go Facebook Live with me, so I make sure he makes it through the whole workout, so I can yell at him. No, and that's, again, like Dal just mentioned to me, it's not only calories. It's also just being able to build up over time an endurance capacity for this type of training. Sure, everybody sees powerlifting as it's a strength sport. It's probably as pure as you can get in limit strength. Much more than Olympic weightlifting, which is much more dynamic. But the endurance base comes built into being able to make it through a training cycle or one training day. Like I've talked about this a lot with Ben Moore. When I first, started helping him, his training was like, okay, I'll go in a squat and then I'm done. And he was done, is why he was done. So, we had to rebuild some kind of endurance capacity. Now he can crush workouts that are, a page long. So, and that then leads into, it's not, you're talking, the greater benefit isn't right now in this one training cycle. The greater benefit is at the end of the training cycle. Now he's built up a capacity to make it through tougher training. He can recover faster. You couple that with a not totally shit diet, and now we're getting somewhere. So.
Yeah, and that gets on top of, as you get more advanced, your timetable's going to have to change. Most people have heard 45 minutes to an hour and a half workout, and then if you go past that, you start to get catabolic, and your muscles start to break down, and you're basically doing more harm than good. Most high-level strongman and powerlifters, and even Olympic lifters, they're just getting warmed up at an hour. And like me, whenever I was getting ready for competition, my last competition where I squatted 843, warming up to 800 pounds, especially because I'm not built like Brian, I'm 240 pounds, I have to rest a little bit longer because that load on my system is so much more than it is for Brian, who's close to 400 pounds, where he can just, his 700 pound squat is like my 400 pound squat. It's something I can recover from really easy. It's still a load on the system, but it doesn't take as much out of me. Once you start getting above 6 and 7 and you're doing sets in that area, three sets might take 30 minutes, and that's just my first workout. And like as you get more advanced, that timetable kind of starts to change, and you'll get into things where you start to looking at total week volume rather than just one workout. But that's kind of a little bit further down in the weeds than we're probably going to get. But building up that cardiovascular base to go 3 hours and not just blow yourself out, and then that's also where it gets into knowing how to attack your assistance work. If you're going too heavy on your assistance work, you'll never make it that far. You won't get through your workout, which is basically you're going to hit your main movements, none of your weak points, and you're not going to get any better. And it might come down to separating, having a heavy squat and a heavy deadlift day, and that's, you might do some core, and that's the day. And then the next day in the week is a lighter squat and a lighter deadlift, and you start hitting all your assistance work.
No, and that's one thing I've been talking about on the show a lot recently is the differences in, I'd say all of us in here would probably rank up towards elite as far as our training, what we're able to do for our physical bodies. We're not beginners. So, I mean, basically what we do is going to be different than somebody who's intermediate or beginner as far as assistance work. Like my beginners, their total amount of stuff they do is usually much greater. But the total amount of damage, even if, like, let's say me, Dal, Brian, and a beginner all have to do a 5x5 squats, the amount of stress that we put on our body at the same percentage compared to somebody new, even though it's the same percentage, what we're putting our body through is much greater. So our assistance work, generally, yeah, we do it, but we're not doing 7 different moves. We can't handle that. That's too much stress, even though it's basically the same on paper. You cut it in real life, it's not the same. We can't handle that much stuff, so we have to get a little more targeted as well with our weak point training. Whereas with a beginner, let's say they're a beginner. They have a ton of weak areas. Like we said, their whole body is their weakness. So we can attack multiple weak areas at one time. Whereas, with us, it's like, okay, I need to squat. My hamstrings are weak. I'm going to attack those. I'm going to do some abs. I'm done. With them, it's like, okay, squat. Well, let's get your hamstrings. Let's get your low back. Let's get your, rear delts, and let's get this. We can attack 14 different things in one session, and now they're just as tapped as we are after hitting 3. So, and that's where rest, recovery, diet, things like that become even more crucial as you go up in your training age or your ability. So, and that's again why drawing it back in here, we need to pick at that minutia more than somebody early on. They need to concentrate on the big things. But pain, you wanted to touch on that? Lead us off.
I was actually going to go into more, as like we were talking to Brian. One thing that kind of led us into this conversation was him talking about diet, and it's something to think about as you get more advanced. That you kind of have to have an honest conversation with you and whoever's involved with you about how far you want to go with what you're in. If it's a hobby, then it's a different thing, and you can just focus on the lifting part of it. If like with Brian, he's starting to chase, maybe all-time world records in the next 3 to 5 years, that, like, he was talking about diet and overall health, and it's sometimes you shouldn't sacrifice your health, but at some point you kind of have to a minor degree, to reach what you want. And that's where you have to have the conversation with you and your family about, this is how far I'm willing to push it. Do I have your backing? Because as all things in life is stress, and you have to have a good base in your family and your foundations around you to go after those goals that you want. And that's kind of along the same lines as having a base to ultimately reach your goals.
Yeah, no, it's one thing we've talked about a lot is it's easy for a kid to come into me and say, I want to be the next strongest man in the world. But then you have to sit them down, okay, that's your goal, that's a great goal. Here's what it's going to take. Are you willing to do all that? And rightly so, most people aren't. That's why there's one strongest man at a time. And there's like 6 people competing for it, or whatever it is. Because the vast majority of the population isn't willing to give up or put themselves through what it takes to be the best, and that's okay. I mean, if everybody was, then we'd all be Brian Shaw and Half Thor, and then it wouldn't be so amazing. But yeah, you have to sit down and have an honest conversation with yourself and your family and say, this is where I want to go. This is what I'm willing to do to get there. I'm willing to do this to make it as far as I can. I'm not going to take that step. And you have to set your own boundaries. I mean, and there is no right or wrong answer. I mean, we've been talking about performance enhancing drugs a lot on the show and things like that. There is no right or wrong in my eyes as far as those go even. It's what's right or wrong for you. That's all a personal decision. I mean, we know they're being done out there. I have lifters that want to go. I want to go as far as I can without them. Okay, let's get there. You're not going to be world's strongest man. Let's just be flat out, truthful about it. And then there's ones that, say I want to be world's strongest man, and, they're naive and think they can do it without that. And it's like, okay, now it's time to have let's get real and talk about this. This is really what you're going to have to do. So, you have to sit down and talk about that, and part of that's diet and nutrition. And, with Brian, it needs to be dialed in some. But then at a point to be, what are you weighing now? 370?
Yeah.
At a point with somebody that big, and hell, even somebody my size, I'm 260 now, I competed 275 last meet, or Dallas size 242. At some point it's just calories. You can't eat broccoli and rice and chicken breast and expect to be 370. There's going to be some other stuff thrown in that if you look at the food pyramid or whatever healthy diet you want to follow, it doesn't fit. Well, you don't fit. You don't fit their protocol. 370 in itself is probably not healthy. So as far as longevity goes, and you have to sit down and talk about that. And then another thing that is just your body itself. We were joking about all of us. We get out of the car here after 4 hours and we're all like, and stretching out, and you're going to go through pain. It's part of the deal. I don't know an elite athlete in any sport that's like, man, I just feel great today, and they're not dealing with something. I feel great on days where I'm dealing with just a couple things. It's like, man, I feel great. Only my ass hurts or whatever. But you're always aching. You're always in some kind of pain.
I don't have anything to say.
You don't have anything to say on that. Yeah, Brian doesn't hurt. Brian's got such a big frame that it's like, my toes hurt.
Yeah, I can definitely chime in on this. But it's with any elite athlete. At some point, you've developed your body to perform a specific task, and when you're not performing that specific task, it hurts. That's why you'll see even sprinters, like when they're slowly just jogging, they look in pain, but when they start sprinting, there's zero pain. And or like strength competitors, everybody when they first start moving hurts, but once their body gets primed to doing what it's used to doing, what you've basically built your body to do, that pain becomes pretty minor and basically shuts off. And this is your body, subconsciously, this is what you're supposed to be doing, or what you've built that body to do. You've built a big ass engine to drag down the strip. The hardest part's getting it to the front line.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like a vehicle, like my truck. It rides like a lumber wagon until I throw a load of wood on it, and then it rides like a Cadillac. It's meant to pull shit.
Yeah, and then when family or friends see us walking around or moving kind of slow, and I'm sure any elite powerlifter or strongman or Olympic lifter can say the same thing, that most of the time their family's like, are you sure this is right for you? You look like you're always in pain. But then they see them do something that is incredible, that 99% of the public can't do, and that's when it kind of clicks. And it's like, there's a guy in Phil's gym that doesn't look like he could do anything, and then he box jumps a 60-foot box jump that nobody would think that he was capable of. It's just unless you, it's one of those things, unless you know.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be?
Anything you say on that, Brian? No. Brian's being shy. I mean, it'd be like I said, going back to vehicles. Like me and my wife, when we got together, got to talking about, me versus her, and just athletes in general. And I was like, yeah, I'm a dump truck. You're a Prius. And she was, at that point, she had got done shortly before that of running 100-mile marathons. So she had built her body up to be able to last long endurance at a lower capacity. Whereas I was built to move heavy loads over short distance and use lots of fuel. You get good, you turn your body into what you want to do over time, over many years. And it becomes very good at a specific task. And that's where, I mean, if we wanted to get into that subject, we'll save it for another day. It's like, at some point, anybody that's going to be great at any sport, unless you're Bo Jackson, is going to concentrate on one sport. And you're going to get real good at that one sport, and other things are going to go away. Like when I decided to be good at powerlifting, I largely dropped most of my running for distance, and I dropped this and I dropped that, but I was willing to, it's again sitting down with yourself, am I willing to give this up to go after that? And if you want to be great, you have to. You know, I can't tell you I don't know a great power lifter, for instance, that could go out and knock out a good 50K time or something like that. It's just, they don't go hand in hand. But you got something to say on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people get stuck in this, like what Phil was talking about. I'm a power lifter, I'm an Olympic lifter, and they attach their identity to it. And that can become kind of unhealthy because in these sports, you're going to deal with injury. And as long as you can realize that that's a part of the sport and realize that it's not going to be constant progress, and knowing how to back off when you're injured and not attach yourself to those numbers, like what Phil's had to do several times after he's had surgery, is, okay, now this is a new PR. And a lot of people get stuck in glory days or thinking it's all going to be linear, and then they get their identity wrapped up in it, and it becomes almost a toxic thing because they don't know how to deal with when they need to back off and let their body heal and forget those numbers for a little while.
They lost themselves along with the injury, and they don't know what to do. Yeah. We'll come back to you here in a minute, and we're going to talk about some stuff with the Arnold, where we're headed to. So, all right, guys, we're back. Now we're just going to do some Arnold predictions. We're, like I said, we're in Indianapolis. Indianapolis, Indiana. We're 8 hours into our drive. So our asses are all hurting, and we're going to give you some Arnold predictions as we head over to Mr. Jim Windler's house to shoot the shit with him and hopefully draw him out to the Arnold tomorrow. So, what do we want to start with? I guess strongman. Let's hit up the deadlift. What do you guys think? Who's going to do what? 500 kilo deadlift. Is anybody going to do it?
I think Halford's got a good chance along with Brian Shaw. And then I'm not as up to date on some of the lifters, but there's a few Americans that can probably do it other than Brian Shaw as well.
What do you think, Brian?
I got my. I'm rooting for this guy named Martins Lissus. I don't know for sure how to say his name, but I'm excited to see he lift somewhere here in the United States. So I'm cheering for him.
I think, I don't know, just watching the videos, man, definitely both Shaw and Halfthor have a shot. I mean, they both hit 950 or some shit.
Halfthor pulled over 1,000.
So, and it was in training, so they were both up there, 1,000-ish. And both look smooth. I think Halfthor's looked his was about a week before, I think, and it looked fast. And then Brian's was a little slower, but that comes a bit down to also how they're built and how they lift. You got grinders and you got people that are explosive. So, I mean, I think they both have a hell of a shot at it, especially, like that was going to be when Brian put it up with, I think that was his last heavy session before the Arnold. So now it's like, once he's recovered and ready to go, I think we could see it fall. That's a huge accomplishment. Plus, it's a lot of money, so that's going to drive people. But Dow just took a wrong turn, so I think we're heading to Tallahassee or something like that now. So, what do you think about the? So they got the big award for that. What do you think about who's going to win overall the whole competition?
Yeah, I'm trying to pay attention to the road now.
Yeah, we're on the air.
If I had to go off the top of my head, I think Halfthor's got a good chance of winning it again this year. Didn't he take second last year by a slim margin? Or did he win it? He won it last year. This shows you how up to date I am trying to navigate through this traffic. But yeah, I think he's got a good chance. He's gotten linked in with some pretty smart coaches if you watch his training. and it seems to be that he's never having a down moment because of how they program him pretty well to be peaked for this. And I think that's going to lead him pretty well into this competition.
Well, I'm kind of partial to Brian Shaw because, I mean, we share names, so. And he's from Colorado, so that's kind of like a local boy, kind of. So I'm cheering for him also, but I just like seeing people move the heavyweights. So I'll cheer for anybody that lifts heavy.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's going to come down between them and the guy from Poland or whatever it was that took second last year. He's an up and comer. I think what Hafthor has over Brian is, I think Brian's close to his ceiling, and Hafthor's still on his way up, man. That guy, he has a frame that can still be filled out, and I don't know how much bigger Brian can get. They're both amazing athletes, but I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's interesting, this competition over the World's Strongest Man, because it's so heavy. But we're gonna let Brian take over here. He's our you're taking over. You're our local bodybuilding specialist, so you gotta get us going on that.
So I'm the fattest one in the truck, but I'm the bodybuilding specialist. I used to read the magazines back in the day, and I always the only one that I've heard of. I mean, I've heard of Brandon Curry. He's going to be there, and Rolly Winkler. I always kind of liked him because he's humongous, and if he can get his stomach kind of trimmed up, I think he can do pretty good. But I mean, besides those two, I don't know who else will be there. Maybe Dexter Jackson. He's kind of one of my favorites because he's 52. He's still hitting it, but I saw a couple pictures of him recently, and he was looking huge. But I don't know if he's going to be there, so we'll see. Besides that, I don't even know any of the new bodybuilders because I haven't been in it for a couple years.
What else have we got? What was the sport you wanted to talk about?
Fencing.
No, it wasn't fencing. It was the other one.
LARPing.
Yeah, competitive LARPing. Dal is a real aficionado on LARPing. He's a professional, elite. He's got his elite total LARPer. No, we get that and cup stacking. He's got amazing skills. I don't know what else is going on. We got the XPC, I think, powerlifting meet. I don't know who's in that. I know who's taking pictures. That would be Jamie. So if anybody needs their picture taken, go over and talk to her. And then I think Ray Williams is lifting at USAPL meet along with some others, so that should be good to see. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know, Ray's probably just got that tied up as far as heavyweights go. I don't know anybody in that federation that can even hold a candle to him. And then Olympic weightlifting, I'm not sure who all is there. It's not a huge meet for them. I know we've got one competitor this year. We had numerous ones last year. So I'm going to vote on our guy. Our guy's going to take it all. And then the Expo, the real winners. We got all the Expo people. We're going to go visit all our buddies out there. We got, Mark Bell's out there with his booth and with Jay Boss. Matt Vincent with Hate Brain Goods. We've got Mike with Throw Bros. We've got Camille and Dave Lipson and Andrew Charlesworth over at Thunder Bros, things like that. We're going to go visit with Jim Windler. So it should be a good time. And then speaking of Jim Windler, he is giving a code out, which Laniel mentioned, for IronRadio listeners only for 15% off of all purchases, meaning apparel and books, which his books do not generally go on sale, so it's a good deal. Like I said, Lonnie will give that code. I don't remember what it was called. Weekend Nachos, I think. Yeah, that was the code. Weekend Nachos, all uppercase. So you can go get in on that. That's going to be live from Sunday to Wednesday, because we normally, even though it's Friday here, and we're on our way to the Arnold, this doesn't air till Sunday. So I talked to Jim and Juliet, and they're going to make that live for everybody. A little Arnold special. I don't know. What else are we going to do? We're going to go hang out with Windler. We got a bunch of... Yeah, go watch some Dan over at Highland Games. He told me he was going to just crush Spencer all day long, all weekend long. He was talking mad shit on Spencer Tyler. He said Spencer's just... He doesn't have what it takes to beat him. Something like that. So, yeah. So it should be a good weekend. Like I said, it's always a pleasure to be able to come down here and catch up with Jim and his family. Jim and James and Juliet and everybody. But until next week, everybody, I hope this was good enough for you. Shoot us a line. Any questions, always drop us a line. And we will talk to you next week.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, you know is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.